Still sending data for the YouTube stream, so that's not good.
Nope.
That's finally says streaming. So it's gonna have like a 30-second delay or something.
Yeah. Got notification on my phone.
Let's check the subscribers.
Still 292.
Okay.
Last episode didn't hit as hard as I was expecting it to.
Yeah, I don't know what. I can never tell why any of that happens.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, part of it was optic loss, so. But
yeah. You'd think there'd be some angry optic fans who would want to check it out, but
demoralized.
Yeah. All right. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
I think we're good. I think my Twitch is delayed. What the fuck? Do it again. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
All right, we're good on Twitch. Yeah, we're good. I don't know what that was. I somehow heard it first on the YouTube stream, then the Twitch stream.
I have no idea. I mean,
we're good now. It worked the way I think I just missed it.
Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 225 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the overload changes that are coming to Black Ops 7 in the Call of Duty League. We also now know that there's kind of been a day-to-day operations change with the Boston breach, which is very interesting, and it kind of ties into the long-held expansion discussions that we've had about the CDL. And we got some other stuff, obviously, that we want to talk about in the aftermath of Major 2. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Had a stressful start to the day. Was kind of hoping it was an April Fool's joke, but as is tradition, this is the worst day of the year, and it started out pretty crappy for me. But now that's in the past, and ready to sit down and chit-chat about some COD.
Yeah, let's cheer you up with some overload changes. It was announced yesterday afternoon that overload will be changing in the way that if you hold the ball, then time stops. This was something that we talked about quite a bit back. I mean, it had to have been early in the Major 1 qualifiers when it was, discovered that, hey, you could just run the timeout and make it a very, very boring third game mode, which is obviously something that the CDL does not want to happen, because that's happened with pretty much every third game mode that there has ever existed. Is at some point or another, teams figured out a way to kind of skirt the rules, or to manipulate the rules is probably the better way to put it, and make the game just pretty awful to watch. This time, overload will be changing, and that the round time will again be paused when one of the teams has possession of the overload device, and then it's obviously going to change from there. It'll be overtime rounds instead of sudden death, all that good stuff. What jumped out to you, and how do you kind of feel about these changes, especially going into the Major 3 qualifiers in a few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, first off, there is no set confirmation that this is coming to the CDL. Technically, it's
True.
Changes coming with season 3 of Black Ops 7. So you would assume, just because like overload was seemingly created for the sole purpose of being a CDL mode and it was just added this year and everything like that, you would think the changes would correlate, but we've seen in the past, like you assume stuff like that, and you never know with COD. So just throwing that out there, it might not be like these changes could be live in multiplayer and ranked play in a couple days, but it might not necessarily be the particular way Overload is played in the upcoming qualifiers. It would make sense to me if these changes did carry over to the CDL, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. I do think the biggest part of this change that I'm excited about is like the pausing when you have the device. I think it, in theory it could lengthen some of these games if people are, like going for very slow and methodic pushes, and I can envision a world where like a team like starts running up the right side of the map and like three players go down and the last guy lives the ball player, and then he like wraps back through their spawn and goes to the left side, and then his teammates die again, like they keep going back and forth. So um I will be interested to see how it plays out and how it actually impacts the time of an overload game. I also saw some stuff. Is it in these patch notes here? I think the overtime rounds is kind of like a golden goal situation, like with CTF, where if they score, then the other team has to score in that amount of time or not. But I don't think I saw anything for sure about what happens if nobody scores in the first overtime period. So I would assume it might be like if nobody scores in the first overtime, then whoever just scores in the next would win. But if nobody scores in any overtime, does that like constitute a map restart, which is how it was in like CTF back in the day, and that led to some lengthy CTF matches,
Yeah.
and in turn it led to some lengthy best of five series where as opposed to like some 25-minute 3-0 sweeps that we're getting, there could in theory be some 25-minute overload maps that are the length of some entire series. So um Rickus Morty, shout out Rickus Morty in the YouTube chat saying third OT is an S&D round, so that would I guess be similar to what is currently um what has happened so far for overload as opposed to what is expected to be the change coming up soon. So we'll have to wait and see with all this how it plays out. But I do think that while team has the ball, pausing the clock, that's good to get rid of the park the bus strategy. Will be interesting to see how teams adapt to these changes if they do in fact come to the CDL.
Yeah, and I saw that Ben pointed out in the replies to I think it was Breaking Point's tweet, and he said, I feel like time pause might make these maps go from 10 minutes to like 20 plus. And I think in the Easy Mac, he replied to that. He said, looking at possession times, if they lowered it to 2 minutes and 30 seconds per half, it shouldn't increase map times by more than a minute on average. So maybe there will be other changes, or maybe there will just be some very long overload maps. I don't know how that will actually affect how it's played or how teams kind of play it is probably the better way to put it. But yeah, it's going to be different, and I hope that it does come. Like you said, it's not a guarantee that with the Major 3 qualifiers that it actually they'll start with this. I imagine they will. It just seems like this is a very simple change. It's been one that teams and fans have kind of been suggesting for several months now, because if we were talking about it early in the Major 1 qualifiers, that was, they started almost 4 months ago. So, like it's been a while. I hope that it's there, but like you said, it's not a guarantee that it will be. But it's something that we're going to have to watch out for. Rick Morty, he said that 4 halves of overload rounds is too much. Bring back control. I mean, it just depends. Like, they don't really have a good option regardless of where they go with third game mode. Like, if they do CTF, they're going to run into many of the same issues that they're currently running into with overload, and the same with control. The spawns, I think, was the biggest, like, really pain in the neck for a lot of teams, because obviously, like, it's a lot different than Hardpoint, where it's like a rotating hill and players are kind of all over the map. There are only 2 options with control, and I think that played into a lot of the bad parts of Control. Maybe if they made the maps bigger, and that would maybe change things, but that would probably also just make Control even more defensive, which I believe it at one point in time Control defense was winning like 70% of the time. So that's not something you want either. You would prefer it to be 50-50, or from a fan's perspective, probably the offense have a little bit more of an advantage just because you actually get points, you get people scoring, you get kills and all that good stuff. So I don't know if you have like a preference with these third game modes. I would assume CTF just based on you being an old head, but
Yeah.
I guess we're also not thinking about uplink, which obviously isn't something that can be really done in the boots on the ground as well as it probably was executed with the jetpack era.
I think especially with the wall bounce mechanic, I think you could have, like, that's the one thing we've always talked about is, like, for lack of a better term, just put like a goddamn trampoline on the ground in a boots on the ground game, and you can only jump on that pad when you have the device and you're like going for a dunk or whatever, and then it's literally no different than having the jetpack. And I think with the wall jump, like, I'm like thinking of Fringe, like you could be able to like jump off of um the barn or wherever where that uplink device was, and get a score in this current game. But I mean, for on some other maps, if there's no like buildings or whatever nearby, then it might be a little tricky. But that's obviously not happening this year, so it's not really worth mentioning. I mean, been plenty of reports and stuff over the last few months about potentially what's coming up with the next COD and all that stuff. So we'll have to wait and see if there is any opportunity for another advanced movement game with uplink making a return. I think a lot of people would be excited about that, but then even if they brought uplink back, people would still find something to bitch and complain about. So it's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, Rick Morty said Control was a nice balance between lives and respawn. The maps and spawns were the problem. I mean, that's the maps and the spawns are the problem for every respawn game mode in really recent competitive COD history. And he said, how about you can only double jump when you have the ball, which would be interesting. It's just really hard to kind of repeat the success of Uplink because like it was actually exciting to watch. It was like the scores could get pretty crazy. It wasn't nearly as defensive as you would think because, you know, that's where CTF and I would say Overload and Control, that's where it kind of is doomed in a way, is because it's just teams kind of just, all right, like we're going to play slow. We're going to make sure that these games are pretty low scoring. A lot of teams do that. You know, obviously not every team and not every game ends up that way, but it does certainly lend itself to a defensive play style, which I just think in general is not as entertaining. If you look at the NFL and NBA, like if it's really low scoring and it's really defensive based, it's probably not that popular. It's probably not that exciting to watch, even though obviously there are going to be people that are nostalgic for a defensive mindset. But like at the end of the day, like more people watch when teams are scoring points, and that is kind of translated into Call of Duty. Like if every hard point finished 150 to 111, I don't think people would be very excited to watch hard point, but because almost every single time teams are able to hit the 250 mark and you have a lot of teams that end up getting, you know, over 200 points even if they lose, I think that it ends up being more entertaining in the end. But yeah, I don't know if there is a good third game mode, to be honest, especially if you're going to be boots on the ground. You know, I've suggested it before. I'm not entirely sold on it, but the idea is that you have like a preferably a longer series than best of 5, but you have like a best of 7 series, and the team that has the I guess the map veto advantage, they can either decide like, you know, the veto, or they can decide whether they want to play 4 hard points or 4 S&Ds and kind of go from there. And I don't know if that would really work, but I think it would be interesting. And I think that we've never really had 3 game modes at the same time that work as well as they probably should have. So I guess we'll see. We'll see how this affects the overload stuff, whether it makes things more entertaining, and certainly whether it makes series longer, because if it does add, let's just say 10 minutes to every series, then that would create kind of a problem, I'm sure. That's 40 extra minutes on some of these days that you're just watching the online matches, and then like what we could have seen at some of these majors where there can be like 6-7 matches in a day. That's an hour, depending on how long you get delays, and then it's like multiple hours longer than you're expecting. And then the CDL probably does step in and say, okay, we got to change some things just to make sure that we're not here all night. Rickus Morty said, remember a week ago when I told you guys Miami were frauds and you guys said I was wrong? I don't know if I said you were wrong, to be honest. I said that they were probably the most consistent team online going into the major, which is factually true. Like if they won whatever that was, 5 or 6 straight matches, and they just I don't even know. We did pick them in the first round, I believe, like whoever they would have played in that winners bracket round 1, but neither one of us even thought they would be like. I mean, you could watch in the top 4 that I picked are like the most likely champions. It was Optic, FaZe, and LAT. And then I think you might have said Genomates as like some kind of quote unquote dark horse because they would have had to come from winners round 1. But I think Miami, I think it still remains that if they're able to kind of put these things together, they could be a team that they were a year ago. It's just, I don't know if they're going to be able to break into that top 4. That's probably the biggest thing right now. Let's talk about. You have anything else before we move on?
No, we're good.
I was going to talk about the M15 and Dravik nerfs. Obviously, they got nerfed, I believe, at the beginning of Season 2 as well. So they're getting nerfed again. The M15 is, quote-unquote, receiving recoil changes that will be felt at mid and longer ranges. This will still be a well-rounded rifle, but now some builds may want an additional attachment to help with recoil. And then the Dravik is getting, quote, a pair of changes that target its mid-range performance. While the magnitude of its recoil isn't changing that much, the direction will now be far more horizontal. Of course, we won't really know how this will really affect the guns because in the hands of a really good Call of Duty player, it might not matter all that much. But what do you think about it? Does seem like Treyarch is like, all right, like we have to fix some of this. We have to dial these 2 guns, which have been the 2 guns that have been used for, I mean, literally, I'd say like 99% of the kills in the CDL this season. What do you think about them saying we have to cut them back a little bit even more?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I don't remember exactly when the last time we talked about the nerfs were, but I know at one point earlier this year there were other nerfs to the M15 and the Dravik, and none of those actually made an apparent difference. They still, unless somehow we just haven't been playing on the patch where those changes went into effect, that like it hasn't mattered. So, I'm interested to see if these are actually meaningful changes on the competitive side, like you said, or if this will just be another case where these guns are quote unquote nerfed in the patch notes, but it doesn't really matter for the CDL guys. So, isn't I feel like in recent years though we've had a couple titles where like the main guns on the CDL side aren't even mentioned at all in the patch notes. So this is at least an improvement in that regard. It's just a question of whether this is going to be actually like a meaningful change that leads to a weapon meta swap or anything like that. That's what I'll be interested to see.
Yeah, Rickus Morty said like in the era of 1,000 attachments, it just changes what pros run on the gun, and I think that's really what it comes down to. Is like I'll believe it when I see it, like when the meta actually changes. We thought for a moment in like early in the Major 1 qualifiers. I don't even remember what the gun was, but it we had it for maybe 2 weeks. There was like 1 or 2 teams that tried it out, and then we're like, yeah, it's really not that good. It's not worth it, at least, and it just kind of goes away. And even if there is another gun that pops up, who knows if if it pops up out of nowhere, it might just get GA'd because the players are like, no, this is actually too good, and we have to dial it back. We have to make sure that it can't be used. So there's no guarantee that literally any other gun will be used for the rest of the CDL season, which obviously just blows. Like it's the worst, but I don't know. The CDL would have to nerf these 2 guns into the ground, like really like take away everything about them that makes them good to make players use another gun at this point.
Well, remember those sweet dreams from many moons ago where we were wishfully thinking that the M8 would be able to be introduced in a non-OP way and somewhat have a shot of being used this year.
Yeah.
That seems like an ancient history at this point.
Yeah, there's just no way. I mean, we were so spoiled, and we didn't really know it at the time, but we were so spoiled years ago. Like even in Black Ops 4, where there was a legitimate 3-gun meta, and granted it was 5 players, but still, like, I mean, or just I don't care if there is a 2-gun meta. I don't have a problem with that. That's been kind of the mo for the majority of the competitive COD experience, but I just want that 2-gun meta to change over time. I want there to be 2 different guns. I want there to be multiple ARs that are used in a season, multiple SMGs that are used in a season, and we just haven't had that. It feels like in a while, or it's just it happens like very early on. We get that change like early in the major run qualifiers, and then it just doesn't happen for the rest of the season. And I think that I get the argument that the players get better and better if they're able to use the same guns throughout the rest of the season. So by the end of the year, they should be really, really good. So much better than they were at the beginning of the season. But it also takes away the skill of adaptability, and they don't have to adapt if you never change the guns, or the nerfs to the guns or the buffs to the guns are relatively minor in nature, like we saw with the Dravik and M15 early in the season, where technically they got nerfed, but they didn't really change how the game was played, and that doesn't really mean anything when it all comes down to it. So I hope that these changes actually mean something, but I don't think they will, personally. I would be surprised.
And Rick Morty asked about a SOG coming this season. I'm not sure if that is the case. I'm going to take your word for it, but regardless of what is or isn't coming, DLC weapons just historically have never been really given a true opportunity to be used in competitive play. So I would be surprised even if the SOG came and everyone was like super excited about it, if it was actually used. But maybe there is a scenario where this Dravik just gets giga
Yeah, that's the
nerfed
only way.
and the SOG is like the balancing part of the equation where it's got to be like a perfect storm of
Yep.
like the SOG being introduced at the same time as the Dravik. Wow, I don't even know what I tried to say there. As the Dravik almost being like unusable, and that like if the Dravik nerfs aren't major enough to the point where they sub players are starting to question it, they're just going to keep using it. They're not even going to test whatever other SMGs are added to the game, let alone what's already in the game.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna say. It has to be right place, right time, and it has to be, like you said, a perfect storm. If it's not, then even if the Dravik got nerfed into the ground, then another SMG, not the SOG, would be used in place of that. It wouldn't be the SOG. So, yeah, we'll see if anything comes of that. Treyarch also announced that it's updating the map set for ranked play. For Overload, Utopia and Gridlock will be added, and Hardpoint, Sake, Gridlock, and Clifftown, and Search and Destroy Fringe, Plaza, and Toshin. Obviously, Gridlock, Clifftown, and Fringe, and Plaza, all former Call of Duty maps, various uses for competitive, I think. But obviously, like, Fringe is the big one. Like, in my mind, like, Fringe is an awesome map from Black Ops 3. It's interesting that it's only an S&D here.
Yep.
Gridlock, though, Hardpoint and Overload, so it gets the respawns. And then Plaza, which is from Black Ops 2, which was an S&D map at one point in time, like very early in the map pool, I believe, and then got phased out. That's also an S&D. So what do you think about some of these changes here?
We're on the same wavelength right now because immediately my first takeaway from looking at this announcement was that Gridlock wasn't included in all three modes, which I think is interesting, but I think at the same time, based on like the Spence tweet or whatever talking about like wanting to see more map variety and stuff, it makes a little sense that they wouldn't want to add one map for all three modes. So if that's the sacrifice, like I'm totally cool with Gridlock, Hardpoint, Gridlock Overload, and Fringe S&D being added to the map pool. I am excited about Clifftown being tested because I've been pretty vocal about that. Excuse me. Even before the like Yemen rename or whatever, like before we knew when it was actually coming into the game, I was just vocal about saying that I think Yemen could be one of those old school maps that wasn't the best back in the day, but would play a little faster, and the size wouldn't be as big of an impact with the advanced movement nowadays. So I'm excited to see how Clifftown works out. Sake was a map that was tried at one very brief point. Whenever that was added, I would assume it was in the break between uh, Major 1 and Major 2, but I don't think anything came of it. I know I watched Optic scrim it at least once on JP's stream. I'm pretty sure it was. So interested to see how that plays out. Fringe and Plaza, though, I want them to somehow be incorporated in the map set in any way. If it means I only get it in S&D, I'm beggars can't be choosers. I'm not gonna complain. I did see Karma had like a tweet about Plaza Hardpoint one of the other days. I didn't put it in here, but he said it was a reply to somebody. And he was like, people were dropping 60 bombs on it back in the day. Could you imagine what they would do today? And that got me thinking. Like, I mean, we haven't seen a 60 like Bocage 50 bombs were
Yeah.
like the rarity of that. Could you imagine somebody drop like if he's saying insinuating at least 60 back in the day on Plaza Hardpoint would be like 80 plus today? Like sign me up for that. That would be electric. I get from a playing standpoint, it might be a little chaotic. It might not be the best, but maybe that's just something we'll see as a result of this map pool thing. And like, even if it doesn't end up working, well, we won't see it because Plaza Hardpoint isn't being tested. But like, maybe somebody will scrim it just for fun, and we'll get to see some clips of it. And if we see people regularly dropping 50, 60, 70 plus kills, then we'll be like, all right, maybe pump the brakes. But it would still be kind of cool to see. But regardless, yeah, I think it's awesome. We're finally getting some map pool tested in ranked play. This is something we have talked about um over the years, really, about like ranked play needing to be in the game at launch, all that yada yada. Like, this is what ranked play should be being used for in a CDL aspect, is that they can take this data and feedback or whatever and incorporate it with any feedback from the pros. Now that's a big like if the pros are actually providing any of that feedback or data in conjunction with whatever is coming from ranked play. But end of the day, I am super excited that this is seemingly getting the wheels turning on some map pool changes, and hopefully it's not a case where in a couple weeks we're back here and like, yeah, all that shit about ranked play map pool changes, they talked about it, but they didn't end up actually pulling the trigger.
Yeah, I wonder why that Gridlock S&D did not get put in there. Like, obviously that was a map that was played across all 3 game modes back in Black Ops 4. Just interesting, I guess, that it didn't make it in, and same with obviously Fringe. With, I mean, who knows with Overload? Like obviously it was not a game mode back then, so but it was, I believe, an uplink game mode, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm interested. I agree with you. Like, this is how ranked play should be deployed. It should always be kind of like a battleground, a testing ground for everything that they want to kind of figure out for whatever it is, whether it be the Major 3 qualifiers or whether it be Major 4. That's always what it should have been. Hopefully that's something that continues as we move forward, and I hope to see more guns, or just a way to kind of push people in a different meta on ranked play than just the competitive meta. Almost like, back in the day with like League of Legends, and like how they would stay one patch ahead when you're doing like solo queue versus like the pros. I would like that if something similar happened. Obviously that it only happens in the CDL when the devs don't really care that the CDL is happening, so they put out a new update and then they have to play on the old patch or just get used to the new patch like within a few days of playing their matches. But I think it would be interesting if there was a way to kind of push players in ranked play toward different guns and different maps, just to see what is out there in terms of the competitive viability of that. But who knows? Anything else on that? I think we should also talk about the Major 2 viewership. We just came off of, I think, a pretty exciting second major. Of course, FaZe Vegas won, and we talked about it quite in depth on Sunday's show. This was also different because it was a European major, so the times are a lot different for North American fans than they usually are. Obviously, we did our show, I think, earlier than we typically do on a major Sunday, and that's because finished at whatever it was, like 4 p.m. Eastern.
We did it late because of the
Yeah.
UConn game, but we could have did it early.
But Vegas and Optic, the grand finals of that tournament, it peaked at 264,000 viewers, which is the fifth highest CDL major peak, according to Breaking Point. And the Breaking Point also said that it was a 32% increase in average viewers compared to the previous European major, which would have been that Spanish major last season, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a 25% decrease of peak viewership from Major 1, which, again, you kind of understand. Like, part of it was also that Major 1 Grand Finals went to a map 7, if I'm not mistaken. Like, it went as far as it could. Obviously, Optic was a lot more competitive in that Grand Final series, which always helps the viewership. Kind of, the green wall is a pretty sizable portion of the CDL audience, and so when Optic has a real shot at winning the major grand finals, that plays a factor. This one was not as climactic, I would say, because FaZe won it in 5 maps. But what do you think about the viewership and some of these maps or some of these matches that kind of rose to the top peak viewership?
Well, the other thing that could have contributed as well to the viewership difference between Major 1 and Major 2 finals this year is Gentlemates. We talked about it last year when they were officially added to the league, that they, even when that team was struggling, they were somehow like, we would look at the viewership and like they would have like a loser's bracket round 1 match that was somehow in like the 4th or 5th spot for the top 5 viewed matches of like these majors last year. And it was pretty weird, but we talked about it multiple times how, like, if Gentlemates can get a good team and it's getting viewership for this team that's struggling, if it gets a good team, what could the viewership numbers look like? And I think that's a pretty big part of what the difference is here, because obviously Gentlemates didn't go on that run, and obviously, Gotaga and crew probably had a pretty successful watch party going on for the finals, and more fans were probably enticed to watch it from his perspective when Gentlemates were in the finals, as opposed to assuming he kept like the watch party going for the finals even when Gentlemates weren't in it. I don't know Gotaga's watch party shenanigans or whatnot. So, yeah, that's the biggest thing that jumps out to me in terms of the difference. Is I do think the time zones probably did play a factor in it, but I think the finals was around like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, because I'm pretty sure it got done around like 3:30 in the afternoon, and that's why because I remember I was gonna tell you, like, if it ended around 3, UConn was playing at 5, I would have been like, okay, we could do the show right at 3, if because if we have a 2-hour show, then I would be good to just pick up the UConn game right after that. But then I know it went beyond 3 o'clock, so that could have played a factor in it as well. But maybe not for the grand finals as much as those earlier matches that were starting at like 9 or 10 Eastern. And obviously 9 or 10 Eastern is 6 or 7 Pacific in the morning. So probably some West Coast viewers who are missing some of those very early matches in a couple of these days. But regardless, I just think I like to see these numbers, and I do think it's interesting that 5th highest CDL major peak is something I wouldn't necessarily have expected, but I it is what it is. I think something I usually tend to bring up is something Dexerto Mike told me many moons ago. He would have told me at Vegas and IW is his viewpoint. He always said that, like, best possible outcome from a viewership perspective on a regular basis is Optic getting second place, because then Optic is in the finals, and like obviously Optic's gonna win here and there, and that's good, but like any chance Optic is in the grand finals, that just only helps with the viewership. So based on the way Optics played this year, we might not get a comparison to be like, okay, these are the majors where Optic was in the finals. Let's look at the viewership for a finals where Optic isn't in the finals. It doesn't seem like we're on pace to have that happen at any of these next couple events, but who knows?
Yeah, I've always felt that way as well. Like if Optic making the grand finals is like a kind of a necessity for the league to thrive in terms of viewership, but it's also very good for the league when Optic doesn't win because it elevates the team that just played Optic. And, if you look at like Complexity back in the day, obviously they didn't play Optic that much. I don't think really at all in the grand finals, but I remember Complexity and BO2 champs beating Optic, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, maybe they lost to Optic in, I think it was like losers semifinals or something like that. But obviously, like, there's been a lot of times where Optic has gotten to the grand finals and they've lost, unfortunately, for the Green Wall. And it's been very, very high viewership, just like Major 1, right? Paris wins that major. That's objectively good for the CDL. That was the highest viewed major of all time. And part of that was, like you said, Paris has this massive fan base. Optic has this massive fan base. It goes to it comes to a head basically with that game 7, and Paris comes out on top, and you basically elevate these. I wouldn't say they're unknown players by any means, but there's no doubt that like someone like Sib is much less popular than Shotzi. But Sib got this championship. Same with Neptune. Like Neptune gets this championship. These players that are lesser known get the glory that Optic has gotten in the past few years. But I just think like in general that the fact that this is the 5th highest viewed, or in terms of peak viewership, not necessarily average viewership, but this was the 5th largest audience that the CDL majors have had. That's really good. Like that is an objectively good sign for the CDL, considering like we just said, like this was in the early afternoon. Like that's a very unusual time for the CDL to be played. Like this major the major grand finals began before most of the actual qualifier days would even begin during the major qualifiers. So like to me, this is a really good sign. They obviously made a trade-off here, the CDL did, because this tournament was shorter than it usually is. It didn't have as many matches as it usually does. The prize pool was, I think, even smaller than some of the other majors, which doesn't really matter nearly as much as it used to, but I think it's still worth mentioning. And the format was something that there were quite a few complaints about as well. And yet they didn't have to, I would assume they didn't have to pay nearly as much to put on this major as they did previously, because this was a part of the DreamHack Birmingham event. And they still got a ton of viewership from it. And I think I think the CDL has had a lot of like wins over the past few months with both the Major 1 and Major 2, even if everything else is pretty much a loss when they come out to it. So, Rickus Morty's in the YouTube chat basically saying like that he's not watching next year if they don't upgrade the PCs in the UK. I think that might just be a DreamHack thing, like, or just honestly just a European thing where they don't want to have to import a bunch of stuff and deal with all the issues that come with that. It's just easier to rent it out. I mean, that's a common thing in events is just like where if you're in Australia or England or wherever, you can always rent it versus bringing your own stuff from Dallas or whatever it is.
I'm pretty sure it was Birmingham, but if it wasn't Birmingham, it was the UK event in Black Ops 4. There was like that huge issue with the monitors. Everyone was freaking out that it was like a entirely different monitor being used.
Yeah, because they were all playing on BenQs, I believe, and then it was like Asus or something like that.
I'm pretty sure that's the event Luminosity won when Classic was using the Rampart.
Yeah, I believe so.
Throwback.
Yeah, so hopefully this continues. I mean, it's great for us, especially on those major days. Typically, like on that championship Sunday, the viewership for our podcast, like obviously is like very, very small in comparison, but it typically spikes after that major because people are very interested in just like kind of absorbing CDL content on those days, which, I think that's pretty awesome. So I again, we are very hopeful that stuff like this continues and that we're able to see more high viewership majors. It'll just take Optic, because if you look at the top 5 highest viewership majors, they all have Optic in the peak viewership. Optic versus Paris, Optic versus FaZe, Optic versus FaZe, Optic versus LAT, Optic versus LAT. That's the top 5. So Optic is kind of a key to that recipe, unless Paris is kind of doing their thing and everybody turns out for Gentlemates. I don't think there's any other way. So we do need Optic to kind of make it. Rick Morty said Paris has already sold 30K for the 3 days, so that's 10K a day. I mean, I think it's going to be an event. Like, it's going to be a pretty crazy environment. I do hope that the Gentlemates are actually kind of like good at that time. I don't want them to be what they have been for the last like 3 or 4 weeks. I hope that they're like an actual major and championship contender, because man, that'll be a real kick in the nuts if they're not able to really do anything once they actually go to France. Next up is the Boston OMiT partnership, which just came out of nowhere. We've talked about many times in the past the kind of uneven future that Boston has. Like they laid off a ton of their people a few years ago now, and we thought that was kind of preceding their exit. We thought it was like kind of imminent. We thought they were just going to kind of shut down one day and we were going to get another team or something, but they've continued for multiple years and have been relatively competitive. Obviously had a great run at champs last year, but it was announced yesterday or reported, I guess, yesterday that the Boston Breach and OMiT, one of the top challengers organizations that has been very, very active in the scene for a long time now, that they are partnering so that OMiT will take control of the day-to-day operations of the Boston Breach, and that there are plans, according to Ronnie Intel of Breaking Point, plans for a long-term takeover after the current season. So I want to get your thoughts on this, because we have sung OMiT's praises as far as their dedication to challengers and how if there is expansion, we've talked about that for literally since the moment that the CDL began. If there was expansion, that OMiT should be one of the top teams to receive an expansion spot. With this news, how do you kind of receive it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting on multiple levels. I think in terms of the expansion stuff that you kind of mentioned, like, does this pave the way for other potential organizations to get an opportunity in the CDL? Someone like Bush, um, even like maybe like an OG org like Rise Nation or something like that, if they enter some sort of partnership with. Oh, Harley's going nuts. I got sidetracked. No, you can. You can cut this out and just regain. So yeah, in terms of the expansion stuff, I think some other organizations could have an opportunity if like this works out with OMiT and Boston. It could OMiT and Boston. It could set the stage for other orgs like a Bush. You know, I would say Stallions, but obviously like Zuma has that relationship with FaZe, so I don't know if like something similar would even be like possible from that extent. But like there are other teams and stuff that could do something similar to what OMiT is reportedly doing here, but it will be interesting to see how this works out from a Boston perspective. We already talked about it last episode with Boston benching Purge and Snoopy. Is this like just a way for OMiT to get some of their current players into the CDL, or is this like more of a long-term play for OMiT to be a permanent uh, partner, franchise, whatever you want to phrase it, in the CDL long term? So I'm interested to see how that works out, because I feel like that's like the short term thing here would just be like two OMiT guys going, and I think Rial and
Yep.
Asim are. You mentioned it last episode. They're two sub players on OMiT currently. Obviously, there's the Aluka situation, which I'm pretty sure he's contracted with OMiT, even though he's a FaZe substitute. So, like, would there be like some scenario where FaZe would let Aluka go from his sub spot to go to a starting spot on Boston if it's tied to OMiT? Because Rafi was saying like he didn't want Luka to go to like some bottom tier team or whatever. But now technically, if OMIT's pairing with Boston, like is that an avenue where a quote unquote bottom team would be a feasible landing spot for a Luka? So um, I don't know if there's like how this is all gonna work out or whatnot, and obviously it's just a report at this time, but um, I am interested to see how it plays out in multiple facets. I think the Boston side of things that's you mentioned, like the layoffs and the financial questions and whatnot over the last couple of years. I think that's been my position this entire time, is that Boston was one of those few organizations that immediately joined the CDL and was willing to host these events and show interest in trying to grow the scene and hold tournaments and all that stuff, where other teams that had been in the league for multiple years beforehand didn't even host an event or try to, seemingly from the outside looking in. And I did, I sung Boston's praises for that. Obviously, there have been other issues with the team and the way the rosters have performed over the years and all that, yada yada. But from an organizational standpoint, I do, specifically in terms of being willing to host events, I definitely think that's something that I didn't want to see go away with any potential exit for Boston. So maybe this partnership is some way to, OMiT and Rafi will handle the team stuff, but then the Boston organization could potentially still uh, take control of like the hosting potential future events or anything like that. I don't know. There's lots of questions around all that in my head. I immediately saw the report and I was thinking of tons of different possible things, but I do think there are multiple ways of looking at this in the short term and long term. Short term, I'll be interested to see how OMiT impacts the current roster that's expected to be playing in a couple weeks for Boston, and long term, whether this sort of partnership is possible for other teams in the CDL and other brands and challengers potentially partnering with an existing CDL team.
It also calls into question how committed OMiT will be to the challengers scene if they were to become a CDL organization, because we've seen all these other CDL teams basically abandon challengers. Like, there isn't, aside from Falcons, is there any CDL team that has like a full challengers roster anymore? Like, or I guess Optic has the Huntsman now, but really consistently the teams have one by one just gotten rid of them, and maybe they have a few substitutes who are in challengers, but they actually don't have like a challengers organization. We saw it with Toronto. They started the CDL with 10 players, so there was like a Toronto Academy, and then there was the Toronto Ultra, and we've seen things like that, but not very consistently. So I would like to see, not only with this current team that OMiT has, which OMiT Brooklyn has Brack, Asim, Cammy, and Real. Obviously, Cammy just came from the Boston Breach. I don't think he's going to get called up anytime soon. Whereas Asim and Real, I think it's, I don't know if they will. I think Real is the most interesting, of course. But just outside of that, outside of this current roster, I think it is interesting to see how OMiT reacts to challengers in general if they were to become, like to take over the day-to-day operations and really run the CDL team. Are they then committed to keeping a challengers team in addition to their CDL team? I think that'll be interesting. I'd love to hear Rafi talk more on that. But yeah, this is really big. I would love if it is. I mean, I'm not going to say Boston OMiT because that's just so stupid, but I would love for OMiT to get their CDL team. It would be sad, of course, to see the Breach go away, because I think that in their short existence compared to the rest of the CDL teams, they have done a lot. They have really tried to be a part of the competitive community, which I think is great. The same cannot be said for so many teams outside of that, because it feels like a lot of the teams in the CDL at one point or another have just been cashing checks, essentially, or I don't even know like if they were actually cashing checks. Those checks are probably bouncing, but the idea is that they're not spending, they're not really giving anything to the community. They're just kind of trying to wait out whatever profit sharing agreement there is, or trying to make as much money on the team sale if there is any money to be made there. Whereas Boston even with the layoffs that happened a few years ago, I never felt like they took a step back and like were not committed to the CDL, if that makes sense. So, I mean, they hosted a major for gosh sakes, like that's huge. That's something that multiple teams that have been in the CDL since the beginning have not done, which I think speaks volumes to their commitment to competitive Call of Duty and esports as a whole, I guess. I guess the next thing would be the April Fool's thing. I hate April Fools like you. When you have worked in news at any point in your life, it makes you absolutely despise these people. Like I would drone strike some of these people's houses if I could. And that's not just esports. I don't really care nearly as much, of course, about esports anymore as a whole in the news environment. But I've not. I don't remember the last time that I actually legitimately laughed at any April Fool's joke. It's kind of one of those things where you're just like dead faced and you're just like LOL. That's kind of how I feel about 95% of April Fool's jokes at the moment. I guess the latest one was Treyarch added a map smaller than shipment for April Fool's, which I mean I'm cool with that. It's just a room. I don't even know what it's called. Yeah, I don't even know what the map is called, but it's literally.
I think it's Get Ready With Me, GRWM.
Okay.
Isn't that like a TikTok thing?
Yeah, it's just like a big closet, basically. Like that's all it is. I'm cool with Treyarch doing this. I mean, they remember when they put in like that leprechaun or whatever, and what was that, World War II? And
World War II had the Krampus.
Yeah, but there was one where it was like some. Oh yeah, Krampus was in a bunch, and they've done like a few like St. Patrick's Day themed events that have been pretty funny, which I think is good. That's what they should be doing, I guess.
I'm remembering now. Krampus in Vanguard was like affecting the scrims, and they couldn't scrim for like that was so funny, dude. Obviously not April Fools, but yeah, no, I had the same reaction. Tremmy, obviously, shout out head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor. He was the one who sent this to me earlier today, and I was like, I didn't believe him at first, and then he showed me the second tweet of it like actually being in the game, and I was like, that's pretty funny. And that's like a harmless. I mean, it's not even really a joke. It's obviously it's not a serious map, but it's like a harmless prank, if you will, for lack of a better term. That that it's a W move from Treyarch in the short. We were just talking about CDL having some recent W's in your eyes when that hasn't necessarily always been the case. I think similar situation here where this is a tiny W for Treyarch in what has been a rough few years for Call of Duty developers in general.
Yeah, I mean I would be off social media if I was a Call of Duty developer. I would not be looking at any feedback from the masses. That's for sure. I think we should probably hold off on actually talking about the Major 2 system and stuff until maybe their next show, because I feel like that would give us like a better like longer show to actually talk about that kind of stuff. But because we have some other stuff that we have to talk about as well. One was this thing that Method said where the CDL would not allow, before the Major 2 Grand Finals, they didn't allow Optic to scrim the Huntsman, which of course is Optic's Challengers team. I did not know that the CDL was that hands-on about just like the pre-match scrims. Like I know there is a warm-up area, usually like backstage, like right as you go behind the curtain, depending on the arena setup. But I didn't know that they were like policing that stuff as strictly as they are. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely thought that was super interesting, and I think that is like that exact reason to have somebody to scrim if you're the winners bracket team in the current CDL format is a huge benefit of having a challengers team, right? And we've always talked about, historically, you and I have both shared the idea of like we want teams to all have challengers teams, and then as these years have progressed, we've understood like the financial restrictions and reasons for not investing in a challengers team and stuff. And this is a perfect scenario here where if you are one of the teams to invest in a challenger squad, you are in the winners bracket of the grand finals. The losers finals is going on off stage. Instead of playing 2v2s or 3v3s with the coaches or just shooting bots, you can actually stay warmed up in a somewhat competitive match against a team that is directly tied to your organization. It's not like a case of like you're asking a CDL team that's removed from the tournament or already eliminated to hang around and be your scrim partner or something like that, which that would be an interesting idea now that I'm thinking about it, but like logistically, I don't know how that would work or whatever. Um, but like I find it incredibly weird that the CDL would have an issue with it being like optics amateur team scrimming against optic to stay warmed up. I don't understand the reasoning
Yeah.
behind that unless it's purely like the opposite of what I just said, where not every team has a challengers team, so they find it to be an unfair advantage if they allowed Optic to do that. Which that goes back to my original point, where it's like that should be a benefit for Optic if they're willing to invest in the challenger system. And then if some other team got through the winners bracket and doesn't have a challengers team, they've got to face the consequences of warming up against bots or 2v2s, 3v3s against themselves, you know? So, um, definitely was one of those things that perplexed me. Obviously, you know, there's always the saying of like every story has three sides: the one person side, the other person side, and the truth. Like we're only hearing this from Method, so we don't know what the um, CDL's perspective on it or whatnot. I would definitely love to hear their reasoning behind this. I don't think we ever will, though, unfortunately. But definitely something to keep an eye on going forward, especially ties in with all our talk about the format and lack of a true winners bracket advantage and all that.
Yeah, I don't even know what there actually could like. What excuse could you actually give that or reason that you could give that would make it make sense? It doesn't make sense at all unless you're saying that you can only have your four players backstage and they have to be warming up by themselves and like nobody aside from your team and like your coach can be like in the warm up area, which that would also call into question like why would that be the case anyway? Like, and I hope that it's not like, well, Optic has this advantage of a challengers team. I mean, they
Yeah.
could have picked any team. They could have picked any challengers team, any CDL team that wanted to just scrim them. Like, I mean, I'm sure Shotzi has a bunch of friends or Optic players have friends where it's like, yeah, of course we'll help you warm up before your grand finals because they know like if they were in the same position, they would want someone to help them out as well. That to me just doesn't make a ton of sense unless it's a security thing or unless it's like it's been a set rule for a while that only those 4 or 5 people can be backstage. Like that just doesn't make sense otherwise.
That's a good point on the security front. If the team like wasn't in the venue or didn't have like, I bet it would have been something different if it was like I this is gonna sound a little weird, but like let's just say this was an Optic event as opposed to a UK event or something. Like I know Hex wasn't at um this event in the UK, like he might have been able to pull some more strings if he was there in person and get this to happen. But if it was a case where like the huntsmen weren't already like checked in for the event or whatever, it could have been a security thing where they're like, we got to get these people like check their bags or whatever, yada yada. I would get it from that perspective. It's still not a great reason. But that's like one of the things you said that like I heard you say that and I'm like, okay, I could actually see that being like the CDL's perspective in terms of like making sure the event's safe and all that. So I can understand it from that perspective. I don't fully agree with it, but that's like the one like very very minuscule excuse I can kind of potentially see where it would make sense why this wouldn't be a thing. If that's the case going forward too, that should be explained to all the teams. And then like let's say Optic is in Championship Sunday, they would just be like, okay, we'll give you like $100 bonus or probably more than $100 bonus, but like it's weird using Optic as an example because the money situation is different from them for another team. But you could even like Shotzi's friends or whatever, like you mentioned, like you could like pick 4 random people that he knows that are like amateurs or whatever, and just be like, hang out in the Optic room for this day, get a team pass or whatever. Not even a team pass, a spectator pass. They could even maybe make them buy a spectator pass. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling at this point, but like just check them in for the day at the beginning of Championship Sunday. If you don't make it to the winners final, or if you don't win the winners finals, you just send them home or let them go watch the event in the stands. And then if you do make it, they're already in your like game room or whatever, like locker room for lack of a better term, and then you can just scrim.
Mhm.
I don't know.
I think I know that there was something about when challengers teams got eliminated or like when they weren't actively playing, they couldn't be on the floor. I know that was like a kind of I don't know what came of that. I don't like I remember seeing it on what had been like Wednesday or Thursday before the event. So I don't know if that had something to do with it. At the same point though, like what is the CDL going to do about it? Like is like if you are trying to win a major and you're committed to that, the optic guy should just be like, what are you going to do about it? Like, if we scrim these guys, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to forfeit us the major two grand finals? Go ahead. Like, literally, like, you are killing yourself at that point. And, like, I think every team can do that, but especially optic. Like, if the option is like, you forfeit is probably the worst thing that probably could happen. Like I can't think of anything worse than that. Like the CDL would be hurting itself and hurting its partners as well because they would obviously have their sponsors that they have advertisements for. DreamHack would probably not be too pleased by that either. So I think Optic and any other team, if this does happen at any other point during the season, they should say, and what are you going to do? Like, we're going to scrim them and you're going to deal with it. And like, you can yell at us afterward or whatever, but like, we're going to be warmed up and we're hopefully going to win the major two grand finals. And if you're yelling at us now, maybe in 2 hours, you're going to be giving us the trophy to lift. Like, to me, that's what should have happened. Obviously that's not how things work. And like, that's not how people deal with the conflicts at the time. And I don't know the situation. I don't know like every single detail of what it is, but it just seems so insane to me that this happened before major two grand finals. I don't know if it actually or how much it affected Optic going into that grand finals and whether they would have won it or won more maps as a result. Like that's literally, you can never know how that'll all work out. But the fact remains, like we talked about it, like the winner's bracket quote unquote advantage is that you don't have to play, and that is sometimes and oftentimes a disadvantage. And FaZe was definitely warmed up. They got to play multiple matches and they got to feel how the actual stage and the environment was on that Sunday, where Optic didn't until they got onto stage. So yeah, it's just a very, very weird situation all around. Anything else that we didn't talk, or I didn't see the Shotzi thing, so you have to fill me in.
Oh, that was just a funny thing. Like they did I'm assuming it's some sort of TikTok trend where like somebody was in the distance behind Shotzi
Oh yeah.
dropping things, and they dropped like some objects, and he said what they actually were. And then the guy dropped a bag of trash, and he was like, "Oh, that's FaZe." And I thought that was just ironic and super funny, and I didn't think of it until after we did the last show that because I remember texting Rule. Rule sent that to me initially, and I was like, surely this won't come back to bite them. And that was before they even played in the winners finals, let alone the grand finals. And I didn't think about it until the next day that, it's funny that happened. And it goes back to last year when Shotzi was starting the trash talk very early in the season. Then they go 0-18, and he's like, I'm going to stop talking trash. But I just thought this was a funny situation there that, lighthearted banter and on all that good stuff. Rick Morty mentioned in the YouTube chat. I didn't put it in the notes, so I don't know if you saw it, but I don't think we need to spend too much time on it. There is some weird stuff going on the timeline involving Abizi and Nero. Apparently, there was a leaked VOD of Abizi using the F slur in a scrim when referring to Rencor, and there've been some back and forth about that, and even Nadeshot like commented on it, and Nadeshot in 2026 Nadeshot fashion gave like a joking response to it, as opposed to like maybe like 2021 corporate Nadeshot. He
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't have had the same response, but full entertainer mode Nadeshot uh responded to it in a seemingly nade shot way. And then there was a Nero thing of him apparently hitting up some chicks on Discord, allegedly, purportedly, whatever. And there was something with the phrase e-sex, which I didn't even know was actually a thing. I still don't know if it actually is or not, but it was a phrase that was allegedly, purportedly, potentially used in some conversations. And there, I did see one response from Hitch because I was watching Method stream yesterday, and Hitch like responded to, he like just added Nero separately and was like, "Yo, that shit got me through COVID" or something like that as a joke, and then he instantly deleted it. So there's been some interesting developments in recent days. I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about those, but if you got anything on that, go for it.
Well, I saw the Nero thing, and then I think the girl who was like accusing him deleted her tweet, like her original tweet. So I don't know what is coming of that, if there is anything to come of that. I didn't like. I am so old now that like I read those messages and I was like, I just need to get off the internet. Like I'm so checked out from here. And the Abizi thing, it was just like, I mean, you know how I feel about these things. I mean, I would say one, it is weird that it got leaked, or how it got leaked is probably the weirdest part, because it calls into question what, like, who got a hold of it and who leaked it, because I believe, I think the rumor was that it was like an unlisted YouTube video for scrims, so like everybody can watch it. But that also, like, that's not easy to find, obviously. Like, and you'd have to know how to find it. So did someone within LAT, not necessarily just the players, but somebody on the coaching staff or whatever, kind of, hey, like, you know, this is what happened, and then it gets leaked out, which is very weird. Like, really could have some serious implications on just like that front of like, hey, who can we trust within this group? Which is obviously something that I think is going to get talked about more in the grand scheme of things, or probably should be. On just like the actual word, I think like he's a fucking idiot. Like, and I've been like, I mean, my two sisters are gay, and I am like pretty, I mean, I'm like in my late 20s, so I was at a point probably where I would have said something like this if I didn't have that kind of experience. At the same point, like, Abizi's like nearing 30 years old, and like, and I'm not saying that he's the only guy to say this, because I know that this isn't the case. I don't want to say like he's like single him out, but like in this instance, obviously, I just think like it's really stupid. Find another word is all I'll say. Like, I don't think that he means like actual malice. I don't know his like views on gay people or whatever, but like, just be smarter and like change the way that you speak, even in private, because stuff like that actually does have an impact. And I think that, and obviously like JCap did this like very famously with Clayster, and when the E United breakup happened in Black Ops 4, where that, I think that was on Twitter, which was even crazier to think about, considering the implications that could have had. Sib quite famously did it when he was, I believe, on Atlanta FaZe Academy, and I saw that he tweeted about it, which it's always good to remind people of when you say homophobic slurs on stream. That's always a good thing to remind people of. And there's obviously been other instances, and I'm sure there have been many, many, many instances of that happening in scrims or in even, you know, official matches when there aren't listen-ins. But like, I just think that's a really stupid thing for him to do. I also think that the people that are saying, I'm glad that cancel culture is gone, I think those people are maybe even fucking stupider, because like literally nothing will happen to him. Like, he might, maybe, like, there's like a 7% chance that he might put out a tweet about it, or he might comment on it. There is like no way that he gets punished for this. Like, this is not the Cammy situation, which everybody agreed was fucking stupid. And I don't even know if that was necessarily cancel culture. That was just like one organization deciding that this one word, which is not really an offensive word to many people in the world, decided that was offensive enough for him to go through like sensitivity training or whatever bullshit that was. But like, in this instance, Abizi will be fine. There will be nothing, literally nothing will happen to him, other than people might think of him differently. And some good, some bad. I will say, like, there will be some people the most like inbred, like most mouth breathing people on the internet that will think of him as like a better human being as a result of this, which I think is just like the most insane shit in the world. And then there will be people that think of him less. I don't think of him any less, to be honest. I don't think he should say that, but I'm also not like like plugging my ears and thinking that the people that are in these positions necessarily are better human beings or are like saints or anything. I understand the real world implications of this. I just think, and again, I'll say this to kind of finish up, just be smarter, change your behavior. That if that had happened on like in a listen-in during the major, it's a whole different ball game. I think we can both agree. Like that shit will hit, and that will not be good for Abizi's career, his life, the people, the CDL, the sponsors that are in bed with the CDL. Everybody will react to that. So that's obviously something that you don't want to happen. And the only way that you make sure it doesn't happen is that you change your behavior before it has the ability to kind of change how you go about your day-to-day life. I didn't want to rant on or anything, but I have been very, very annoyed on just like social media is a cesspool. So I've just been kind of festering about it, to be honest.
Have you ever seen the South Park episode where they, mention using the shortened version of the F slur?
No, I've not.
It's something along the lines where like they end up the South Park kids go to court, and it's like they're trying to explain the use of it, and they're like, obviously this is many years ago, but it's like, somebody's riding down the street in a Harley and he's revving his engine or whatever, and they're like being a dick, like what do you say? And like one of them's like, they say the shortened version of the F slur, and it's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean we think they're gay. We just, we say that they. So it's like that's what made me think of it when or that's what I thought of when this whole thing was going down. Is like that's obviously times are different, and people have inevitably said some stupid things. I know I've said stupid things many times over the years, but I do think, sort of like you said, that as you grow up and mature and stuff, you got to realize when you should use certain things and not.
Yeah, I think my biggest thing, and this has been obviously like this has become more of an issue because the pro athletes now have grown up in a world in which social media has been like a thing for most, if not all, of their lives. Like the people that are going into like the NBA or MLB right now, they are like 19, 20 years old. So like when they were 10 years old, like Trump was coming into office, like that stuff like that, where everything has been kind of like baked in that social media. And a lot of them have had like, old tweets where like that shit does not age well, or like things that they've said on live streams when they were kids has not aged well. And I think like, I mean, again, we're older than a lot of the people in the community, I think, and older than a lot of the players. Certainly. I mean, we would be like two of the oldest players in the CDL at this point, but I just think that you have the ability to make or break your career in many ways. And I just think this is a really stupid way. Again, this will not affect Abizi like in really any meaningful way, but like he could have really screwed things up for himself by using this. And again, like I'm not saying that he actually has malice. I think a lot of people use it as kind of just like a catch-all, the same way that the R slur has been used for many years. Yeah. But to me, like I don't use those words because I just know that they're gonna like, it's a nasty word that was meant for different things, and using it for trivial matters seems even like worse to me at times, where it's like, why are you going to kind of resort to using that word when there are so many other fun words to use in the English language to describe rancor in that moment. So I would just say that I hope that this kind of, I think it'll move past very quickly. I can't ever remember this being an issue. I don't even think it was really an issue when Sib did it, and that was more recent than like the JCap incident. but like Sib, I think he might have gotten like benched or something like for one weekend for Phase, or maybe he actually got dropped from Phase Academy if I'm not mistaken. But I'm pretty sure by the end of the season in MW, he was back on Phase Academy for like Challengers Finals or whatever. So, and again, we live in a completely different world and country in 2026 than we did. I believe that was in 2020. So, again, I think you just shouldn't use it. But as far as the Nero situation, I have no idea. Like, best of luck to everybody involved there. That seems like way over my head. No idea what to do with that one. No rant coming from me about the Nero stuff. I think that is a good place to end it on. This is a weird way to end the show, but this is a weird week in the competitive COD community. We should be back at some point in the near future. I don't know if it will be this Sunday or not, but we still have our power rankings to do, our pre-Major 3 qualifier power rankings, and I think those would be fairly interesting because there have been a lot of changes since the last time that we did them. The CDL, basically, like, nobody was consistent for the last like 2 months, and that's going to make these power rankings very, very difficult. And then of course matches, they come back like I believe April 17th if I'm not mistaken. So again, we have a few weeks until that is the case, but we'll be back before then to talk about stuff, and of course if there are roster changes or whatever there is, whatever news in the CDL or competitive COD, then we'll be back to talk about that when they happen. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Let's get to 300 subscribers, hopefully before Major 3. That would be really, really incredible. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers. The podcaster is at Ego Chall Podcast. If you want to watch these streams live before the podcast goes up on typically Monday morning or Thursday morning, you can do so watching live on YouTube or twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can follow and subscribe there. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/JBink with 2Ks. And yeah, I think that about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. This was definitely a interesting episode that took a turn at the end there, but I think it was fun in the end. And, serious stuff and, all that aside, like, we had some good stuff to talk about, and I think important conversations to be had in terms of the in-game stuff that could be coming down the pipeline and affecting the matches that'll be back in a couple of weeks. So going to be some, scheduling stuff here and there over the next couple days. The next episode will probably depend on when we get any roster news or anything like that. So just bear with us, but we're trying to stay consistent and stick to our usual schedule. So should be as close to that as possible as long as there's actually stuff to talk about. So shout out Rigus Morty, obviously in the YouTube chat, holding it down again, being a regular there and supporting. Shout out you, and shout out anybody else who tuned in to the live shows. But yeah, until next time, thank you as always, and remember to send the chow.